Coming? Okay. Okay. Uh, so, in our series of lectures on concepts of health and disease, today we go on to the second lecture, and since I've got the same slides, I'll just run through what we have already done. We have talked about the health, the concepts, the definition of health, philosophy, the dimensions of health, standard of living, determinants of health. Then we defined disease, and we went through the ecological and sociological point of view, the concepts of disease, the social concept of disease, and then we came to the concept of causation. And we then were talking about the epidemiological triad. This, let me tell you, is one of our, as I said earlier, is one of the most important lectures of community medicine. We'll come back to this every time we talk of any disease. So please understand this. Basically, whenever a disease takes place, one has to remember that there has to be an interlinking between the agent, the host, that is the human being, and the environment around. You take any disease for that matter, any disease. There has to be an agent, there has to be an host, and there has to be an environment. Now, when you talk about non-communicable disease, the agent should be a little different. We will talk about it when we talk in detail about the various diseases. But generally, this must be remembered that any disease you have, there has to be an interlinking, and this interlinking is called the epidemiological triad: agent, host, and environment. So let's see what are the agent factors. The agent factors can be biologic agents, and these biologic agents depend. Now, for example, COVID came in the first wave. When it came, the infectivity was high, the pathogenicity was high, the virulence was high. We had a large number of cases. Today, COVID is still there. We have a large number of cases. So the infectivity is still high. The pathogenicity maybe is there, but it is possibly a little bit less than earlier. And the virulence has gone down. We have less number of people dying. So possibly the virus has mutated to a less virulent strain. Or maybe the virus will mutate again to a very strong, very virulent strain later on. So it depends on the agent. Also, there can be other agents like nutrient agents. Like for example, a person having deficiency in vitamin C will have scurvy. Person having deficiency in vitamin D will have osteomalacia. Or a person who is deficient in proteins will have kwashiorkor or marasmus or protein energy malnutrition. So nutrient factors are equally important. Nutrient factors are also important in infectious diseases. How? You have, for example, you must have heard that resistance is based on the immunoglobulins. So, what is the protective mechanism of the body also requires immunoglobulins. Globulins are proteins. So, if you do not take enough proteins, how can you have enough globulins in your body? So, a person who is nutritionally poor will also be immunocompromised. Remember. Physical agents. Now, physical agents can be anything which can be from various. Okay, we have some of these things coming again. Physical agents are those, like for example, as I mentioned last time, we talked about physical agents like heat, cold, various other things which are there. Mechanical agents like you have machinery, etc. Chemical agents which can be endogenous in the body or exogenous. You can have chemical in the body. Exogenous is from outside. And social agents which also play a role. Now, we already talked about this infectivity, ability of an infectious agent to invade and multiply in a host. That is infectivity. We have heard a lot about infectivity when we talked in terms of COVID. there was a lot of talk of R naught being the amount of that one person can infect to others. The infection can spread. How fast the infection. We talk about R naught in detail when we talk in epidemiology. But here it suffice to know that infectivity depends on the ability of the infection agent to invade and multiply in force. Pathogenicity is the ability to induce clinical illness, and virulence is the proportion of clinical cases which go into severe disease. As I mentioned now, in COVID, we have less number of people landing up with critical condition. Case fatality rate will definitely generally measure the virulence. So, what are the host factors? The host factors depends on the age of an individual. Now, in the extremes of age, there are more disease. A child is more prone to disease, and the elderly again are more prone to disease. In between, we have a particular portion of time when the immunity of people is much better, much better. So, there are various other things, like for example, if you're looking at diseases in delivery, you can't expect it in the elderly. It will have to be amongst those who are capable of producing children. So the age matters a lot in various things, in all diseases for that matter. Age has got a bearing. Some of the diseases are more in males than in females. Look at COVID itself. We'll look at COVID. It's more common in males than in females. Why is it so? We need to study that. Ethnicity. Ethnicity makes a huge difference in various diseases. Look at COVID. Again, we'll look at COVID. I'll keep on quoting COVID because that's the disease which is going around today, and you people have been reading a lot about it on Google. So, look at the ethnic difference. In the US, we'll look at the US for that matter. In the US itself, the whites are the one who are getting the infection more than the Indians, or they're becoming more critical than the Indians. The blacks are getting much more disease than the whites, and they are more critical. So we have a large amount of problem difference in ethnicity. If you compare the various hemispheres, you find that COVID disease is so much more in the Western Hemisphere, much less in the South Asia. For example, India, etc., are having much less number of disease compared per thousand population as compared to the Western countries. However, please remember this: we are not the best. India is not the best. India is approximately the worst in Asia. Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, these all are doing much better than India in the COVID race. Okay. The host's biological environment really makes a difference. It's genetic bearing. If your mother and father suffer from diabetes, you are more likely, or you are about 40% chance of becoming a diabetic. If your parents suffer from stomach cancer, there is a likelihood that you may suffer from stomach cancer. So genetic bearing is there in various things. Also, there is if a person has got a consanguineous marriage, then genetic problems increase. Biochemical. The biochemical environment is also very, very important. Immunological, whether the person is immune to a particular disease or not, decides whether you can get the disease. The biochemical parameters, whether the person has high blood sugar or various other enzymatic levels. The social and economic levels. Now, for example, Ambani can stay in his bungalow and walk he can walk kilometers inside his bungalow possibly, do exercises in his bungalow, he's got a gym, he's got everything, and still not come face to face with COVID. Well, can a person come do so in Dharavi? In Dharavi, the person will come face to face with COVID every single day, every possibly every minute of the day, because it's so crowded. So his economic status determines as to whether the person comes in contact with disease. Another is the economic status also decides what food he takes, and what food he takes decides how nutritionally strong is he, how much protein he takes, and how much immunoglobulins he produces. Social status of an individual also matters. If you are of a higher social status, you generally try and tell, or social status also depends on your educational levels, and your educational levels decide what types of precautions you will take. Lifestyle. The poor cannot find enough food, do enough exercise, but they cannot find enough food. The higher class have enough food and eat junk, and they do not want to exercise, so they land up with various diseases which we call lifestyle diseases like hypertension, diabetes, obesity, triglyceridemia, various other diseases. Environmental factors. Now, the environmental factors, the various factors which are around you, which can result in uh, and which have a bearing on disease. These can be classified as physical, biological, and psychosocial factors. Now, the physical factors basically, like for example, what is the mm, uh, what is the environment around you? What do you inhale? Um, what is the water which you take? What is the various infrastructure facility which you're living in, or the biological environment where what are the bacteria which are present in the air around, what is the bacteria in the water which is present, or where what are the various other toxic wastes which are around. The psychosocial environment. You live in an environment where you're at peace, you'll get less disease. Various diseases for that matter, not all diseases, but psychosocial has a bearing on many diseases, many diseases. Stress has a bearing on many diseases. A simple thing like diabetes. You are more stressed out, diabetes increases. You're more stressed out, hypertension increases. So psychosocial bearing is also there, is an environment which we are concerned about. Okay. Now, we talked about the agent host environment. Is that all that really causes disease? The agent, host, and the environment? Is that fine? Let's see how it all developed. You see, initially we had the germ theory. The microbes were found to be the cause of many diseases. So Pasteur, Henle, and Koch, these were the ones who put up those propositions of the microbial theory after discovered microorganisms in the patient's secretions or excretions. So what did they say? They say Louis Pasteur also was involved in this, and they came up with the germ theory of disease, which said there is a one-to-one relationship. The disease is caused by an agent, it comes into man, causes the disease, and the man can excrete the disease and then infect others. So this was a simple theory which is put forward, and that is what we call the Henle-Koch postulates. The Henle-Koch postulates are each disease will be caused by a germ. Each and every disease is caused by a germ. The germ is essential for that disease to be caused. It cannot be caused by anything else. The germ is essential. It is not that in English. It's just that first it says that it is caused by a germ. Others say that the germ and the germ only is responsible for the disease. By introducing the germ, that disease can be caused in animals experimentally. That is what they thought, that all diseases of humans can be injected into animals and you get the disease in animals. We are now aware that some of the diseases don't take place in animals. Yeah. And that germ can again be isolated from the sick animal and experimented. It's very simple. These postulates are very simple, but they are very, very important as far as the theory of causation of disease is concerned. Okay? Okay. So, this would seem to be a very simple um, theory which is there. This is so. Pettenkofer said this theory, the unifactorial, that only one factor causes disease, that is not true. There is something more also. And how can you explain that a germ causes, say, diabetes or hypertension? It doesn't. So there's some problem which is there with this particular theory. We need to, maybe it causes some diseases, but some others it doesn't cause. So the generalized explanation is applicable only to infectious diseases and not to non-infectious diseases. So he came up with, Pettenkofer came up with the theory of the multifactorial causation of disease. That means there are multiple factors which cause one disease. Even when you talk about, say, germ theory, but the human being requires to be immunocompromised or maybe a less degree of immunity he has. There has to be various other also factors which are responsible. So that's how we came up with Leibel and Clark, who came to the theory of natural history of disease and also took up the levels of prevention, which we will talk about later in the next lecture. So, what they said was there is a definite equilibrium between the agent, host, and environment. So, whenever this equilibrium is disbalanced, that is the time when disease occurs. So, it's a very simple theory put up by the Leibel and Clark, who said that there is an epidemiological triad which is in equilibrium, and in this equilibrium, when it is disturbed, results in disease. So, when does this disease occur? So, they call the disease the seed, the host factors as the soil, and the environment factors as a shower, which is there. So, the disease occurs only when the host factors and environment factors make the agent sufficient enough to cause the disease. So, we must be sure that the agent and the environmental factors can play on the host factors in such a manner that it will result in disease. So when we talked about the multifactorial causation which was put up by Pettenkofer, he mentioned that should be some socio-economic factors, some cultural factors, some genetic factors, and psychological factors. I am not going into the various. I'm not going further into these factors which we discussed earlier, but it is necessary here to mention, like for example, that prevention works whenever in case of non-communicable diseases, we are looking at lifestyle issues. We are looking at diet, we are looking at exercise, we are looking at smoking. All these things will have a bearing on, say, coronary artery disease. And the factors which are there for coronary artery disease are things like hypertension, a person having hypertension, more likely to get coronary artery disease, or having excess of fat intake, smoking, or lack of physical exercise. All these can result in coronary artery disease. That is how we have a multifactorial causation. Again, we thought that this thing was too simplistic. Very simple. You're not really talking about various other interplay of factors. You see, hypertension is responsible for hypertension is responsible for cardiac disease. Okay, but there are so many factors which are responsible for hypertension, and these factors which are responsible for hypertension may be responsible for heart disease also. So the various factors, when you start putting it, and that will be the next slide. I'll just show you that next slide. But when you put these slides on, when you put these factors, if you were sitting in a classroom, they put it on the blackboard, and you would have enjoyed this thing of how a web is formed, web of causation of diseases there. But since we cannot be physically present, and we have to go through this, I call it a sham of having a YouTube class where I can't even see you. I can't even know whether you're understanding the topic, whether you are liking my talk, or you're sleeping, or you just put on your YouTube and you're gone somewhere and you're just kept it on. So I am one of those who is highly against this YouTube method of teaching. I would prefer the Google Meet or various other methods which are there where I can see y'all and interact with you, have an eye to eye contact, and be able to have an interactive session. But anyway, we will we have to adapt ourselves to situations as they come. So each factor in this epidemiological web of causation has its own relative importance in causing the final departure from the state of health, as well as interacts with others and modifies others. So when we talked about the way some of the things which are there, like the germ theory itself, they all explain infectious disease, but then for non-communicable diseases or for accidents, the epidemiological triad has some failings. So there is no single agent which causes IST. A wide variety of interacting factors finally lead to a pre-pathogenic condition or a plaque formation. This theory also postulates that for preventing the disease, it is not necessary to take action against all the factors. You need to take action against some or the weakest link. You go to the weakest link, target that, and then that will result in decrease of the disease. If we could identify the weakest link in the interlacing webs, actions directed to these weakest links may be of considerable value in the prevention. So look at this. It's a simple web, not a very large web. We have tried to clear up the web. Like for example, we have talked about coronary occlusion. Now this coronary occlusion is basically because of changes in arteries. The changes in the arteries are due to hypertension, stress leads to emotional disturbance, or to hypertension and changes in the arteries. When you have stress, the person smokes. Now, if I had a blackboard, I would have also put smoking has a direct bearing on change of arteries also. It's not that it is only through hypertension. Smoking has a direct bearing on age of change in the arteries also. Aging also has a bearing on change of arteries also. Aging has a bearing on coronary occlusion also. Now, smoking can directly lead to hyperlipidemia. So here you see it says that lifestyle leads to obesity and to hyperlipidemia. But smoking per se also leads to hyperlipidemia. Coronaries and hyperlipidemia can lead to atherosclerosis. Coronary atherosclerosis will lead to coronaries. So like this, you can have various interlinkings which will take place, and this interlinkings is what we call the web of causation of disease. This is again you can see the web coming up where you have hyperlipidemia being caused by increase in fats, increase in total calories, and hyperlipidemia also being caused due to physical activity, also due to heredity, also due to hormones. Also, this hyperlipidemia can lead to coagulation. It can lead to atherosclerosis. It can atherosclerosis can cause hypertension, and there are various interlinkings which can take place. We have made a simplistic diagram over here so that we can explain it to you. And these all things cause a web. A web. This is called the web of causation of disease. Now, some other people wanted to put another theory forward, which is the epidemiological wheel theory, where they said the comparative role of genetic and environmental factors in the causation of disease should be emphasized. So the triad as well as the web theory, these things really don't tell the complete history, and it is the main one now which we consider always the web of causation of disease. So in the wheel theory, basically the genetic code is what is very important. A large number of diseases have there is a bearing of the genetic factor. This theory visualizes human disease in the form of a wheel, which has a central hub representing the genetic components and the peripheral portion representing the environmental components. So this is like that, like this, which you have central core or the genetic core for surrounded by the social, biological, and physical factors. And so these are the ones which form the which are responsible for causation of disease. Now, for example, diabetes mellitus, the environmental component which is there, you've got a social component which is very large, the genetic component is quite large, and the physical and biological components are also there. So there is another thing called the Bean's model of disease causation, which postulates that human disease and its consequences are caused by complex interplay of different factors. Biological factors innate in a human being, or behavioral factors concerned with individual lifestyles, environmental factors, physical, chemical, or biological factors, immunological factors, nutritional factors, genetic factors, social factors, spiritual factors, and services factors related to various aspects of healthcare services. If, for example, you have a person suffering from diabetes and he doesn't get treatment from the healthcare service, his disease is going to aggravate. But if it is treated early, then his disease will get will be under control or be cured. Now, I must also now just give a mention about the fact that whatever disease we see in society is only a small portion of the total amount of disease which is present in society. Why is this so? Because there are so many people who would have the disease and not come out into the open to say that they've got the disease. That's number one. Second is there are so many people who will be carriers, and in the sense they will not be having any symptoms of the disease, but they have the infection in them. Okay, so measurement of the level of health and disease is a major issue in public health. We can measure the magnitude of sickness that have some come to the notice of healthcare providers, but likely to be a gross underestimate of the magnitude of the problem. We are missing out a very large number of cases who are present in the population with an undetected disease, and those with mild disease or those who never reported to the healthcare provider. So this is what we call the iceberg of phenomena of disease. The symptomatic people at the top of the iceberg. Even among the top of the iceberg, you find at the level of the water, there are people who have got a disease but do not come to healthcare providers. And the rest, there's huge amount of asymptomatic people who are below the clinical horizon. The magnitude of disease that is apparent clinically is a small fraction of the entire load. The major part of the load is not clinically apparent, lies below the clinical horizon, and hence lies hidden in the computer. So this is what we see. The top portion, say about 2%, is death. 12% approximately is visible cases of clinical illness, and a large portion which is there is invisible cases. Not 2%, 12%, 32%. This is a particular study which was there, which had a total of 46 people. So they divided among 2, 12, and 32. That's how it is. So the huge amount of people who are not invisible. Okay. So we will next class we will discuss about the natural history of disease. So it's how the disease progresses, the natural history of disease, and then we will come to the levels of prevention. Please remember very, very important lectures, and you will be asked upon to remember these lectures right through your career. Thank you very much, and we will see you again next Saturday at the same time. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, all of you. Like I was just seeing how many of you have come in. A lot of you who have come in and are put your attendance here, but I hope you all are understanding the lecture. I hope there are no problems in understanding the lecture, because very simple class which is there. I hope you all understand what is going on. And if there is any problems, you're most welcome to ring me up. My telephone number is available with the department, or you can note it. It is 8185823503. You will be with me, as I said, right through till your third year. And so, if you have got problems, please let us know right away, rather than waiting later and getting bored through your lectures. So please let us know if you've got any problems. We will try and make the lectures more interesting. It is very difficult to make lectures interesting in YouTube. I am deadly against YouTube. Uh, let me tell you, I myself get bored while taking my lectures. So, all the best, and hope to see you next